Gentleman Jack, the TV adaptation of Anne Lister's life, chronicles in her 4 million word long diary that has been described as the Rosetta Stone of lesbian history. The show has had a big effect on the visibility of queer history, and like all the best shows on the BBC, it's been cancelled. First it was Merlin, then it was its less good replacement Atlantis, then it was an excellent Doctor Who spin-off Class, and now this. Every time I like something, they get rid of it. Anyway, I was very excited to watch Gentleman Jack, both seasons, because this is a series about a specific person from history who I already knew a lot about. Generally, the eras and themes of history that are most popular on film and TV never happen to be the ones that I'm interested in myself. Until Gentleman Jack. The only downside of this is the historical spoilers, like knowing when and how they die. But still, Gentleman Jack did not disappoint. It is the first historical drama about the early 19th century that actually fits the impression of the time period I get from reading the actual history. That is a little bit chaotic and very contradictory. So, in the slim hope that the BBC might find a replacement partner for HBO, here is why Gentleman Jack is the best historical drama I have seen for a long time. What Anne Lister is most known for today is her diary, where she relays her daily life with great detail and precision, including all of her relationships with women. Gentleman Jack covers the later part of her diaries during her endeavours to solidify her relationship with another wealthy heiress, Anne Walker. The two are known as the first women to seal their union by taking the Holy Sacrament in church together. Anne Lister was an heiress and businesswoman living in the first half of the 19th century in Yorkshire. After her uncle and brother died, she took on the role of running Shibden Hall and the Lister family estate. As heir apparent, she received an unusually extensive education, which she continued with her own interests in science and classical texts. Her family name might have been falling into obscurity, but that didn't stop her investing and commissioning projects in her town, Halifax, while participating in high society and travelling all around Europe. In the series, we get to see Anne Lister going around Halifax as her usual self that doesn't fit in with societal expectations at the time, and definitely doesn't fit our expectations of life in the later Regency period. You know, the standard Regency drama based on adaptations upon adaptations of Jane Austen novels. Her costume and hair were modelled on this picture we have of her, where she does away with the puffy sleeves and skirts silhouettes of the time and dresses in all black instead. The one thing the series adds is her top hat to reinforce how she conducts herself as gender non-conforming. The plot closely follows Anne's life, including all the drama happening with her coal mines, her other business decisions, her reactions to wider political situations, and, of course, her romantic endeavours. The reason for this is that it was all written in consultation with an Anne Lister scholar. Anne Comer, another Anne. There are too many Annes in this situation. Anne Comer studied Anne Lister for her university thesis, and she sustained an interest ever since then. She transcribed a big chunk of Anne Lister's diaries for the series, which is not an easy task, because most of it is heavily abbreviated, or for the really juicy stuff, it's written in code. This research was put into a book to accompany the series, so we can say the historical research behind Gentleman Jack is among the most up-to-date scholarship of Anne Lister that we have. And it was all carried out specifically for the TV show, which is good because it avoids the problem where TV and film producers think that if a book is non-fiction then it's all in the public domain and there's no intellectual property involved. So they can just lift all the information they want without working with a historian who actually did the research. But anyway, Anne Comer is the latest in the line of people who have taken on the momentous task of studying Anne Lister's diaries. Because it's huge. 4 million words! Even the biggest fanfics are struggling to compete with that. The first person to discover Anne Lister's diaries was her descendant, John Lister. His main goal was to publish his family history and all the impressive things his family members had done. Obviously he was interested in entrepreneurial-minded Anne Lister. That was until he cracked the code and discovered her secret lives of women. He was advised to burn the diaries, but luckily his innate sense of historical importance prevailed and he didn't. But he also didn't study them much after that, and the story of Anne fell into obscurity. From the 1920s to the 1940s, local historians got into transcribing the diaries, except for the coded sections about her romantic life. The first historian to publish the full, unedited account of Anne Lister's life, including her relationships, was Helena Whitbread, who was followed by Jill Lidington in the 80s and 90s. These accounts pushed Anne Lister into the view of historians. To this day, we don't have a more detailed piece of evidence about the life of women with a huge amount of local power and her relationships with other women than Anne Lister's diaries. But that comes with its own problems. Because her diaries are so huge, only a small amount of them have ever actually been studied. As Jill Lidington says, faced with such a daunting mass of material, each generation has, perhaps inevitably, left us with their own version of Anne Lister. And let's be real, Gentleman Jack is the version of Anne Lister that most people know about today. Are we really gonna leave this story of Anne Lister incomplete? So now for how they actually portray this historical research in the series. The biggest thing that struck me was how often we get to see archive materials on screen. Other than her diaries, the Shibden Hall archives also hold all her letters and many other household items and personal records. Sometimes it can be difficult to translate paper evidence into screenwriting in a way that audiences will not only understand the meaning, but will also understand it's an actual piece of documentation that's being talked about. In Gentleman Jack, we get to see Anne Lister writing in her diary, and she and the other characters writing and receiving letters. This isn't super groundbreaking by itself, but what I love is how the archival material has been incorporated into the writing, especially by breaking the fourth wall. In Anne Lister's diaries, she divides her public and private lives. For the public side of her life, she writes normally, but for her private life, she writes everything in code so she can relay everything she wants without having to worry about prying eyes. In Gentleman Jack, we see Anne carrying out her public life as a respectable, landed lady, but then suddenly she looks down the camera and quotes what's really going on in her diary, telling the audience what she's really thinking and what's really going on. The fact these personal thoughts can be lifted from actual written material is pretty unusual. Most archival material centers on wealthy, straight man, and Anne Lister is only ticking one of those. Seeing those written materials being produced on screen makes you think about how they were produced and stored during the time they were used, rather than how they can just be found in an archive box today. And it also paints a seed of thinking about who has the power to produce materials that will eventually be represented in archive storage. Catherine Madison is talking about archival material in Hamilton here, but the principle remains the same. The centrality of documents as props and as subjects on stage and in song tells an audience much about the value of the archival record and even about the nature of the archives as a constructed space and a space of power. Remember, John Lister nearly burnt Anne Lister's diaries, which would have left us with nothing about her real life. And sometimes her letters were burnt and we only know about them because Anne summarised them in code in her diary. We see this happening in the series too, with letters being burnt or instructed to be burnt, and so the series signposts how we know these things happened, and it also starts raising questions about how much of that might be the actual truth. It's very unusual for a historical TV series to have this kind of relationship with its sources, and while it's not perfect, it can lead the way for other historical dramas to consider ways of signalling to audiences where its information comes from, while also making this feel natural for the storyline. The dialogue includes historical details in really smart ways. There is one scene in Series 1 where the Lister family talk about the 1832 Reform Act. This act widened the vote to more men, but also specifically denied women the vote. Before this, women weren't technically banned from voting if they had the right amount of wealth, but after this they were explicitly excluded. Anne Lister doesn't support the reforms because it would mean her tenants and other men in the town could now vote, but she and other wealthy women might own more land than them. Meanwhile, her sister Mariam thinks that the reforms are good because it gives the vote to the people who are working to build up the town as the Industrial Revolution changes society. You get to see two sides of the argument and to learn more about the history of voting law, all while developing Anne and Mariam's characters. And then again, you get to see more about how voting worked in the 1830s in Series 2, when the two Annes wield their political influence over their tenants. They basically tell their tenants who to vote for, meaning that while they don't technically have the votes themselves, they in practice have influence over about 100 votes. We already see a lot in media about the suffragettes, so it's good to see something that represents the very messy and also a very corrupt way that voting worked in the lead up to their movement. One more example is in Series 2, where the dialogue explains marriage law in a way that addresses questions the audience might have. Captain Sutherland suspects Anne Lister is seducing Anne Walker, and he tries to report this to a lawyer, but the lawyer explains that there is nothing they are doing wrong by law. He's also explaining this to the audience, who might have heard about the increase in enforcement of law that led to people like Oscar Wilde being imprisoned, and now they're wondering how that might affect Anne Lister. These types of laws aren't known about too well, especially how they affected women, so it's good to see them being included in Gentleman Jack. And now for the things about the series that I just like, forgetting about the historical representation. I like how Anne Lister and Anne Walker present two types of 19th century femininity. Anne Walker is a nervous heiress who likes wearing pink in all the fashionable cuts and generally is familiar to other period dramas. Meanwhile, Anne Lister is nothing like any character we've seen in a period drama. A lot of the time, characters with this sort of contrast are set up to sort of diminish the more conventionally feminine character, while the character who takes the more masculine role is like this feminist icon who defies expectations. But in Gentleman Jack, we get to see how these two types of femininity can coexist and even complement each other, with neither one being better or worse. Anne Lister can be too inconsiderate of others, while Anne Walker can be too unsure of herself. I like seeing Anne Walker becoming more confident and assertive in this series with the help of Anne Lister. And because of this contrast, we get to see more clearly Anne Lister's gender nonconformity. In case you don't know, there's been a lot of debate online about whether Anne Lister was lesbian or trans. The debate got so heated that it led to the wording on her blue plaque getting changed. But in Gentleman Jack, we get to see how Anne Lister was both, but also neither, because she could only express her gender and sexuality using the ideas and words of her time. Her diaries are full of contradictions about this. Sometimes she takes on masculine vocabulary and sometimes not. She also theorizes about sexuality using her classical and scientific readings. I think Suranne Jones' performance and her character design expresses this complexity brilliantly. I also love how the music and tone represents the historical setting. It's kind of mischievous and subversive. It makes the 1830s feel like a time that was lived in by people like us, and not like they're just reading off a list of period drama tropes. It feels very refreshing. I do think Series 1 pulled off this tone a lot better than Series 2, but that might just be because the filming of Series 2 took nearly a year because there was a lockdown between it. So that might have made it difficult to maintain the tone and for the actress to get fully in character. It's also great to see historical drama set in the north of England. Most British TV shows and fiction seem to take place in London and the south, so it's nice to hear place names like York, Halifax, even Market Wheaton being mentioned. And also for those locations to actually be representing themselves and not to just be a stand-in for a London location that would be too expensive otherwise. York Minster is actually York Minster in Gentleman Jack. And the effect that Gentleman Jack has had on these locations is pretty amazing. There has been a noticeable increase in footfall and interest in these sites. Shibden Hall has seen so many more visitors coming to see Anne Lister's ancestral home and to learn more about her life. They went from seeing a few thousand people a month to nearly 15,000 in some months. There have been Gentleman Jack themed holidays in Halifax, and there was an Anne Lister birthday celebration. People have been travelling to Halifax from around the world so they can feel closer to Anne. And that is the power of Gentleman Jack. I do have a small criticism about the representation though. The new series references Anne Lister's first relationship with Eliza Rain, who was half Indian. We know for a fact then that there was one mixed race person in Anne's life, and yet pretty much everyone we meet in Halifax and York is white. While it wouldn't make sense for Eliza herself to appear in this point in Anne's life, it still seems like the perfect opportunity to incorporate a storyline referencing the Empire and the growing diversity in England, especially as Anne Lister's diaries themselves show that this was part of the early 19th century, even in wealthy circles away from London. That said though, a lot of people today feel connected to the representation in this show. There is a BBC documentary about how Gentleman Jack has helped people to come out to their families and even to reconnect with a lost lover from many years ago. It's just a nice thing to see. This is why historians want to study hidden histories and to bring out these stories for people to connect to all these years later. So what did you think about Gentleman Jack, and how did you feel about the cancellation? The BBC is looking for a new partner, so not all hope is lost. Please let me know who your favourite characters are and which were your favourite moments. And a reminder that the like and subscribe buttons are things that exist. And I will see you next time.